Drink with James, episode 120. Exciting news. I do not have to try and convince you to go to the conference. That conference has come and gone. It went great, by the way. It's in a couple days, but my assumption is it went great. Everybody loved it. If you didn't go, you missed out. And the richness that might have come into your life is forever gone, and that void will remain like a festering cyst on your soul for the rest of your life. So I feel bad if you didn't go. If you did go, I'm sure you will agree that it was the best money you ever spent in your entire life. So thank you to those of you who went. To those of you who didn't, you're dead to me. But we don't have to talk about the conference anymore, so I won't. I will say, I was at a meeting with a bunch of other startup founders last week in Pittsburgh. And, you know, something I think we've talked about before, but maybe we haven't talked about in a while. This is not my insight. This is something that I read in Ben Horowitz's book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things, which I loved, and you guys should all read. I thought it was great. But essentially he says that, like, you know, in business life in general, there are no silver bullets. Like, there is no one thing that is going to change your business. And for influencers, you know, I hope you come here, you know, I hope the things we talk about on this show help you. I hope you also understand that there is no one thing that you will ever do that will change your business forever. It is about every day showing up and doing little things over and over and over again and trying new things and putting the work in. I think that, like, I look back over nearly 6 years of having this job, and it is just 90% of it is thankless work. It's just grinding it out. And it's not for everyone. Starting your own thing is not for everyone. It is really hard. The chances of it working out are essentially slim to none. There's a lot better ways to make money. There's a lot more stable paths that you can take. And those paths are not wrong. You know, it's not a bad thing to work at a big corporate instead of a startup. It's not a bad thing to decide that you don't want to be an influencer or run your own business. But you have to have the appetite for work and to do everything in your power to make it work. I think that, like, you cannot overstate the importance of that, and having that mindset and saying that, like, I will literally do anything to make this work. Anything. Nothing is beneath me. I will fucking try anything to make this work. If you have that mindset, I think that, like, generally it can work out for you. You know, in that same book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things, Ben Horowitz, who's a, you know, famous investor, venture capitalist in Silicon Valley, he says, you know, people ask me all the time, what is the one thing that, like, connects all the great founders and CEOs that you have worked with in your career? Is it their education? Is it, you know, whatever, work ethic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Like, what is the one thing that is the common thread between all of the great people that you have met and worked with? And he said, the only thing that is prevalent in every great founder, but is not prevalent in everyone else that he's worked with, was that they just never stop trying, they never give up. And that is kind of cheesy, but I think it is true. You know, I think that, like, if you have the stamina and if you can work harder than everyone else and just keep doing it and never give up, I do think these things eventually work, because I don't think most people have the appetite for it, because it's generally a fairly shitty life. It certainly does not have the comforts and luxuries of not doing something on your own. So I take solace in that. Maybe you do too, but understand that anything you hear here, anything you hear on the show, anything you read, any piece of advice that you get at a conference, whatever it is, there is no thing that anyone can tell you that will be the key that unlocks success for you. There are no shortcuts, unfortunately. It's just a lot of fucking hard work. And what people don't like to talk about is it's also just a lot of luck. So with that, let's get started with the show. You mentioned having a brand-facing email. How do I start this? Great question. First of all, I asked a bunch of you to send me your emails if you started a brand-facing email. A lot of you have done it. I hope I've responded. They look great. If I haven't responded, yours looked awesome. Thank you for sending it. What's funny is Grace Atwood did one. She sent it to me. Looked great. She sent it to everyone at 4, at least the people that she knew and worked with. And Grace, who works at 4, who sits next to me, like grabbed me and was like, "Oh, did you see this email that Grace Atwood sent?" I was like, yeah. She's like, "This is great. More people should do this." I was like, "Yeah, I mean, I literally just talked about it. I said she should do it. She did it. She fucking killed it. It looked great." But it was interesting because Grace was like, who works for me, was like, "This is amazing. More influencers should do this. This is really helpful." So thank you to those people who've done it and sent it to me. They look awesome. So how do you find the email addresses to the brands? We use data.com, which is shutting down in May of this year, I think. So data.com, right now you can use it. It's like $1 a contact. So you can say, "I want the VP of PR for Michael Kors," and it will give you a name and email address if you pay $1. So that's a good solution. Ask your influencer friends, see if they'll share their contact with you. Look at press releases. DM them, find them on LinkedIn and DM them. Just dig. They exist. The email addresses exist. You can get it. I have found the email addresses of some very powerful people, and then I hounded them until I got what I wanted out of them. You can find them. They're somewhere on the internet. So you need to first figure out who the person is, and then figure out, what the email is. Another thing you can do is if you, let's say you find on Instagram who works at, let's say it's Michael Kors, and then you go to their website and you find let's say they have a press release, and at the bottom of the press release they have the head of PR's email address, and you see that it's first name dot last name at michaelkors.com. Well, then you've found the Instagram of the person you want to email. You have their first and last name, so you just do first name dot last name at michaelkors.com, and you have the email address. There are services as well, which I can try and find, which will, if you put a first last name and a company URL in, they will give you every iteration of the email address possible. So there's ways to test it as well that way. So there are ways to do it. You have to be a bit of a digger, but you can find those email addresses. It goes back to what I said about just putting your head down and doing the work. This is not fun work. It's not fun to dig for an email address for 45 minutes. But I've spent more of my life than I want to admit doing just that. You just have to do the work. If you want to work with a brand, but you say, "Well, I don't know their email address," well, then you don't really want to fucking work with them. If that's as far as you're willing to go, it's just saying, "I'd like to work with them," you don't want to work with them. If you really wanted to, you would find a way to get in touch with them. It's not that hard. This is not, this is not Fort Knox. This isn't some treasure locked away. This is a fucking email address. So find it, reach out to them, keep reaching out to them until they tell you to go away, they're not interested, or they answer you. How do you do it? MailChimp is very, very easy. It has templates, drag and drop tools. It is super simple. You can go to MailChimp, sign up. I think it's free if you're not sending a huge amount of emails. so it probably won't cost you anything. I think you could probably put an hour and a half, 2 hours into figuring out their system, building a template, and sending your first email out. So understand that like the shit that you do, the new stuff that you do may not look as good as you want. It may not be as professional as you want, but what is important is just doing it and getting it done. If you don't, I was talking to this guy who I asked to get coffee with, who I really respected from the internet years ago, and he told me, he was like, if you don't look back on the things that you produced or put out there a couple years after, and if you're not embarrassed by them, then you're not moving fast enough. If you don't look back at your newsletter in a year and say, oh my God, like I cannot believe I sent that out, then you're probably not moving fast enough and you're being too much perfectionist. Like perfection often stops you from making progress. I think there's a quote that's like, perfect is the enemy of good or something. Is there something like that? I don't know. There's something similar to that is just like, if you worry too much, you'll fucking never get anything done, and you just need to get it out the door and then work on the next week getting it better, and the next week having it better and better. First of all, also, I don't expect you to send a brand email out every week. Once a month is totally fine. Once a quarter, also fine. But just get it better every time. But get it out. Put a deadline on. Say by this Friday, I'm going to send that brand newsletter out. And if it doesn't look as good as, I would have liked, well, I'll make it better next time. I can assure you it is more important to do it than to do it perfectly. So MailChimp, honestly, I can't suggest any other platform. I think it's so easy. They make your life incredibly easy to design and send these emails out. So. Are blogs forced to face an evolution since it seems people are not reading them anymore? One, the data doesn't totally support that. More people aren't reading blogs. It's not like blog traffic is going up. So that is true. There's also not more people starting blogs, really. So blog traffic has stagnated, but the people who check blogs and the people who publish blog posts, every day or a couple times a week, those people are still getting meaningful traffic, and that traffic is not falling. For influencers out there, it's an interesting way right now to differentiate yourself. Everyone's doing the Instagram game. Not a lot of people are doing blogs. That is an opportunity. It may seem anachronistic to go back and start a blog. You'd be like, what is this, like back in 2006? But it is a way that you could separate yourself from other influencers. So that's one thing. The data is showing that blog traffic isn't falling, but it certainly is not growing. Do I think that blogs are doomed? Yes, I do. I think that the internet as we know it, a browser where you type in URLs, I think that is going to eventually be outdated. I would be surprised in 10 years if we're typing in websites. I'd be fucking shocked, actually, if we were still typing websites into a browser. I don't know what that all looks like, but I'm not sure that traditional URLs and browser-driven internet is the future. Blogs are, they're just not the way people read things anymore. I mean, even look at like NewYorkTimes.com. I go to the New York Times a couple times a day. Most people probably follow New York Times from a link in Facebook, a link in Twitter, something like that. They're not just navigating to the site. And so that's the problem with blogs. It used to be an interview question of mine when I was younger, maybe 8 years ago or so. I would ask people what blogs they read, because I would get in the morning to work and I had 4 or 5 blogs that I read every morning before I started. That was kind of how I kicked my day off. I would never do that anymore. I might follow some of them on Twitter, so I can kind of see what they're talking about. I might follow them on Instagram, and I might go to their blog every once in a while, but I used to check those every morning. So I just think that behavior is probably dying. That said, it will take some time for that to happen, and having a blog isn't a bad thing, and again, it could potentially be a way to separate yourself. So long-form influencer content is slowly dying, probably. I don't know what the replacement is yet. Maybe we'll build something. Yeah, if you're an influencer, do you need a landing page? It's so easy to start one. It would seem silly not to. You could spend a weekend on Squarespace or Wix or any of these tools that advertise on every fucking podcast in the world. So you could spend a weekend and you could put up a site that pulls your Instagram feed in, that has your contact information, that has some collaborations you've done, that has a little bio about you. Shouldn't be that hard. It's silly not to have it. So if you don't have any web presence, I think it adds a level of professionalism that is almost standard. The other thing is that, like, if you're doing this as a job and your email address isn't your custom URL, if you're still using a Gmail, I think that, like, that doesn't inspire a lot of confidence. So if I was, you got your Instagram, buy a URL. When you buy that URL, you can buy a package that allows you to create email addresses. Create those email addresses. You can pull them straight into your Gmail. But if you're asking people for money, you should have an email that's not your Gmail. You also obviously need to have a business LLC. Like, you need to create an actual business and pay taxes on it and all of these things. So this should all be a part of that. But if you don't have that in line, first things first, go get a URL and throw something up. Question number 1 is, I don't enjoy accounts with the creative being all about me. How can I avoid that on my account? Well, 1, don't point the camera at yourself. I would say that is probably the easiest way to avoid it. In all seriousness, you're right. Most accounts are about the owner of that account. That is not just because people are self-involved, but that's the stuff that does really well. Photos of you are probably the thing that does best on a feed. People like to see the person behind the camera or whatever it might be, but there are a lot of very successful accounts out there that don't have a face to them, that aren't all about the person running that account. I think in those cases, you have to have some skill or talent that is interesting in itself. So it is not easy to live a life that is so interesting that people want to follow you. It's not easy to have style, to be able to put together looks every day that, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of people are interested in what you're wearing and want to emulate you. None of those things are easy. But the thing is, if the account is about you, the nice thing is that nobody can be you as well as you can be you. So inherently, you should be the best in the world at that thing, which gives that account purpose. So if you're going to go out and say, I'm going to start a photography account, or I'm going to start an account about interior design, or I'm going to start a inspiration account where I just post photos that I really love, you can grow that account, you can build a following that way, but you have to be really fucking good, because you cannot lean on your inherent individuality as a person to separate you from other accounts. If you have that talent, if you have that unique vision, I think it can work really well, and I think it's a fast, easy way to kind of grow an account. But it is a rare talent and vision that you would have to be able to be successful there. That's all, people. That's my advice for today. We're gonna go put a conference on now.